From taking a look at Paddy Pimblett in one of our more viewed career retrospectives, let's have a look at another homegrown talent out of the Cage Warriors cage who has already rounded up 5 UFC victories and now looks to bounce back after his first professional loss. We're indeed talking about 16-1 Wales bantamweight Jack Shore. Jack Shore has paired a 16-1 career as a professional mixed martial artist with another deep undefeated run as an amateur. It's rare to see a fighter record 11 straight on the topology amateur scene, but what now becomes more prevalent in MMA with the likes of Mokaev in Brave and this example now in Jack Shore out of Cage Warriors. The IMMAF is a premier spot to rack up in-cage amateur experience, and Jack Shore paired a championship in 2015, but also fought amateur in Cage Warriors and other regional organizations. After reeling off the 11 straight wins and capturing European Open Championship, Jack decided he'd gather enough experience to confidently make the move to his pro career. He'd take his first pro fight for Pain Pit Fight Night, where he got a couple amateur wins back in 2015, and he'd continue with a first-round rear naked choke win, and this was when Cage Warriors realized that Jack has exceptional potential. On June 4th, 3 months after his pro debut, he'd make his Cage Warriors debut against another undefeated fighter. Shore would earn a submission win in the first round, and what followed would be an exceptional run of wins that could possibly be touted as one of Cage Warriors' greatest runs ever. Every time Cage Warriors would hold an event in Shore's home country of Wales, the local man Jack Shore would show up and show out. Cage Warriors would do its best to match Jack Shore up with the best possible fights for a young fighter. Shore would keep knocking opponents down, displaying an elite grappling game way ahead of his record, and his takedowns being relentless. He's more capable of finishing a fight with his jiu-jitsu or ground and pound, but his striking is pretty good as well. On Cage Warriors 79, Shore would win via ground and pound against Eddie Pobivanez. Then again, in the Newport Centre in Wales, he'd drop back-to-back first-round finishes, capping off a devastating 2017 run with a win over Mattia Galbati in October and a first-round win in November. Opening 2018, Jack Shore was now 7-0 and a serious threat to capture Cage Warriors gold, snatching all 7 triumphs via stoppage, boasting 5 submissions and 2 stylish TKOs. His highlight reel continued to grow and his reputation as a well-rounded competitor started to leak outside of the United Kingdom. Cage Warriors would test Shore with his next opponent, this being former UFC fighter Vaughan Lee, who brought 27 fights of experience into the cage with him. This test would be the deciding factor behind Cage Warriors shifting their focus from developing Shore to making him a premier name of the organization. The other significant shift for this fight would be Jack Shore's jump down from featherweight to bantamweight. This fight would be Shore's toughest challenge to date, and this fight would be the first to make it out of the opening round. Through all 3 rounds, Shore and Lee would trade on the feet, and Shore would out-wrestle his opponent. Impressively, as the rounds progressed, Shore started to display superior footwork to the fighter with 8 career UFC bouts, and Shore would land a 30-27 unanimous decision. At this point, Shore was no longer fighting spots to fight in Cage Warriors when they came to Wales. Instead, he was forcing Cage Warriors to put him in the main events of the biggest events. On Cage Warriors' Cardiff card, Englishman Nathaniel Wood would defend his bantamweight title against Italian Luca Levine and would end up vacating the division for an opportunity with the UFC. This left a clear gap for Shore to step into the title picture, and this was at the same time as Cage Warriors was approaching their historic 100th event. So, 6 months after his win over Vaughan Lee, Jack Shore would get a hero's welcome in Cardiff and finish his Brazilian opponent in the first round. This quick result would set Shore in a title fight on Cage Warriors' 100th event ending the year. I personally wish we saw Nathaniel Wood take on Shore in the main event of that fight, as this would have been a Cage Warriors super fight on a Cage Warriors historic event. But with Nathaniel cashing in on the huge opportunity with the UFC, another impressive undefeated competitor would step into the matchup against Shore for the vacant title. Shore would fight Mike Ekundayo, who had 5 of his own stoppages on an undefeated 7-0 official record. Mike served as Nathaniel's training partner and was known for his elite wrestling and strength. In the main event of the sold-out Viola Arena in front of Shore's home country, he'd dominate. Shore would outgrapple and outstrike his opponent, and with less than a minute left, Mark Goddard stepped in to save the exhausted and bleeding Mike, giving Shore his 10th straight win. Nonetheless, Shore would have one more fight for Cage Warriors, this being his swan song. He was now undoubtedly a coveted prospect. The Cage Warriors president, who is now closely involved with the growth of Jack Shore, would announce his signing to the UFC. The perfect setting for the newly signed Shore would be on the UFC's first event in Denmark. The LFA Nolan Hernandez would welcome Shore to the octagon. Shore, riding his impressive win streak outside the UFC, saw him enter the fight as the favorite. Shore would dictate the pace and position of the fight and sink in a rear naked choke just before the final bell for his 11th stoppage. For his next fight, Shore would take the trip to Fight Island in the beginnings of the pandemic and would do as he does, winning by submission. With the bantamweight having gone 2-0 to start his run with the promotion, a third straight win would send his stock skyrocketing. He'd be met by Hunter Azure, who had posted a 2-1 record in the UFC after entering from the Contender Series in 2019. This fight was back and forth, but Shore got the best of most situations. The fight was rather close, with Azure in his own right being a great wrestler and a powerful striker, but the official decision would read split for the Welshman. He'd win another 2 UFC fights, and it would then be 19-3 Ricky Simón. Now at 16-0, Shore was building a real interest and hype. Simón single-handedly derailed that meteoric rise of the undefeated Welshman. A split-second hard right hand and arm triangle submission at the 3:28 mark of round 2 would be the moment, and after mourning that loss, he'll look to redeem against the now longtime UFC veteran Makwan Amirkhani this weekend, UFC 286. Let me know what you guys think. Do you think one of the coveted prospects in the UFC can get back to winning ways, and can he make a run at the bantamweight title? For this fight, he's minus 500, and you can find the best odds with BetStamp. But that will wrap up today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.